Hey, Young Turks, this is Nomi Konst. You've heard the news this week that Donald Trump Jr. has gotten himself in a little bit of trouble over some emails about a meeting with a person who may or may not be linked to the Russian government. And he went out and he published his emails, and now it seems like it's causing grounds for impeachment, possibly, as we now have the House Democrats putting forth an investigation for impeachment. So we're very privileged to have a regular now, Mike Lisikoff, who's the chief investigative correspondent at Yahoo News, and he has been following the Russia story forever. I mean, I feel like I've had 900 conversations with you about Russia because you were one of the first reporters to cover this last year when no one was paying attention just yet. So, Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hey, glad to be with you. And, it never stops. You couldn't, if you were writing this for the House of Cards or something, you couldn't script it any better. Just when you think you've got a handle on where the story is going, we get another plot twist.
Right.
And this week was probably one of the biggest of all.
So let's talk about, let's go step by step of what happened. Because there's a lot out there. This is becoming a partisan topic, as it usually does when it involves, a sitting president and there's politics involved. What do we know for sure happened with Donald Trump Jr.?
Well, what we know for sure is that in the first week of June of 2016, which is interesting in and of itself because it's the week before we first learned that the DNC has been penetrated by Russian cyber hackers, which really put the Russia story on the front page. So it hadn't quite bubbled up to the surface, although there were plenty of rumblings and talk, and Paul Manafort, who was coming on as the campaign manager, certainly had all these curious ties that some of us were writing about. But this is before it's like huge, major story. And Donald Jr. gets a series of emails from a longtime associate, a music publicist for a Russian pop singer who happens to be the son of a pro-Putin oligarch in the Kremlin.
Naturally.
Saying, hey, which is usually the way these things go, right? Anyway, and this publicist, Rob Goldstone, informs Donald Trump Jr. that his clients, the pop singer, Emin Agalarov, and his father, have sensitive information about Hillary Clinton that the Russian government has collected, and they want to get into the hands of Donald Jr. in order to help his father's campaign. This is part of the Russian effort to elect Donald Trump president, and Rob Goldstone spells it all out in these emails.
Mm-hmm. And Rob Goldstone, that's my dog, hi. The joy of working from home. Rob Goldstone is American, and did he have a relationship with Donald Trump?
He's a Brit, actually. He's a Brit.
He's a Brit, okay. What was his relationship?
Tabloid reporter. Well, now you're starting to ask the really interesting questions, because this didn't come out of the blue. Right. Rob Goldstone, who, by the way, I interviewed at great length months ago, about the events in Moscow during the Miss Universe pageant in 2013, when Donald Trump flies over there to host the Miss Universe pageant. There were, there was a lot of controversy and questions about what went on there. And when Donald Trump's partner in that Miss Universe pageant was Aris Agalarov, the son of the father of the pop singer, the billionaire oligarch, because that was the venue. It was being held at a place called Crocus Hall, which is a giant half Albert Hall, half Carnegie Hall in Moscow, state of the art, that Agalarov had built. Now, one of the things that happened there that didn't get as much attention as it probably should have is that Donald Trump and the Agalarovs entered into a business arrangement at that time to build a Trump Tower in Moscow. This was going to be a licensing deal. Agalarov would build it, would license Trump's name. This is the standard operating procedure for the Trump Organization. A letter of intent was signed, and Donald Jr. was put in charge of the project. And although some of the earlier stories sort of dismissed this and said it really didn't go very far, it actually was a formal, serious business deal. In fact, Ivanka Trump flies over to Moscow in February 2014 and scouts potential sites for the Trump Tower in Moscow with Emin Agalarov. And there's actually a photograph of the two of them together in Moscow at the time. And ultimately, the deal doesn't go through. Why? It never gets built. Why? Well, in 2015, the Russian economy crashes, in part because of the imposition of sanctions by the United States and the EU over Russia's intervention in Ukraine. So one of the interesting things, and I learned all this from Goldstone during my interview, he was there with Trump the whole time during the Miss Universe pageant. But this begins to give you some idea of why Trump and later his White House and administration are interested in lifting sanctions on Russia. It was those sanctions, these very same sanctions, that screwed up Trump's business deal in Moscow, one that he had put his son in charge of bringing to fruition.
But so how big was that deal? I mean, is that enough? Obviously, Putin has the goals of removing these sanctions, and so far he hasn't been successful at that. But how big was that deal? Was it for Donald Trump to be going through all this? I mean, was it that large of a business deal for him?
Well, look, we don't know. We know he was very interested. Donald Trump was very interested in building it. He talked a lot about it. He tweeted about it. In fact, right after the Miss Universe pageant, he talks about how excited he is that there's going to be a Trump Tower in Moscow. Was it going to have a material impact on the Trump Organization? No, probably not. But this was something that was clearly close to his heart. He wanted to get built. He'd signed a deal. He'd put his kids in charge of it, and it falls through. Now, does that fully explain his interest in lifting sanctions? Probably not, but it's certainly something to think about when one looks at what Trump said during the campaign and what his administration started to do in those first few weeks when they were quietly maneuvering to lift sanctions.
So that's the backdrop. That's the historical.
And then you see, if I can add, we get these emails.
Right. So that
the Agalarovs, first of all, it underscores just how close the Agalarovs, Donald Trump's business partners, were to Vladimir Putin.
Exactly.
They were, so close that they are being entrusted with sensitive information that the Russian government has that it wants to get into the hands of Donald Trump and his campaign.
Now, all right, great. This sounds like all the connections are building the case for what could very well be the coordination between Putin and Trump during the campaign to meddle with the election. With that being said, why would they be so stupid to put it in email?
Well, you can say this about every scandal that unravels because people put stupid stuff in emails. This is a gold for prosecutors when people write stupid things in emails or incriminating things in emails. Now, I'm sure at the time, Rob Goldstone, who's the author of this email, and Donald Trump Jr., who replies, by the way, love it.
So what did he say? What was in the email?
The email, Goldstone is offering this sensitive information, explicitly saying it's part of the Russian government's efforts to help the Trump campaign. And Donald Trump replies, "Yeah, great. I'd love to hear it about it later in the summer." By the way, closer to the campaign, to the election, when the Trumps believe they're at that point they're going to be one-on-one against Hillary Clinton.
But we don't know what was in these emails. We still don't know what the sensitive information was.
No, we don't know what the
Trump
sensitive
says
information
he's
is.
going to release it.
Everybody's been focused on the lawyer, the Kremlin-connected lawyer who came into the meeting and actually just really wanted to talk about the Magnitsky Act, the sanctions imposed on Russian human rights abusers in the government as a result of a law passed by Congress. And she doesn't really have any sensitive information at all. Now, it may well be that, I mean, there are two possibilities here. Number one is there was sensitive information that the Russian government had, but it never made its way to Natalia, the lawyer, who was the cutout here. And, option B is maybe they didn't have it at all. And Goldstone is blowing smoke for some reason. We don't know. That's certainly one line of questioning that people are going to have for Rob Goldstone, and it's hard to see at this point how he won't be questioned by the congressional committees and federal prosecutors and Bob Mueller's staff. But remember, if you go back to the email, Donald Trump Jr. isn't interested in the lawyer. He says, what does he first say? He says, great, I want to talk to Emin about this. His buddy, the pop singer, Emin Aguilera, who, by the way, is also the vice president of the Crocus Group, his father's company. So he's a pop singer, and he's also a Russian businessman, the son and a top executive of his father's company being one of the biggest builders in Russia.
Now, even if his intent, Donald Trump Jr.'s intent, was to take this information and use it to affect, he says it's opposition research, although, opposition research from a foreign government who has the intent of, perhaps meddling in the election, which it seems very clear, although this guy was an agent, not, wasn't like Putin emailing himself. How do we get into the legality? Number one, Donald Trump Jr. is now... He's not paid by the administration, but he is an advisor. At what point does he become part of the administration, and at what point does this information actually, what's the flow of intent in legality?
Look, he's not part of the administration. Right. So now Jared Kushner, who briefly attended the meeting, is. Right. In and of itself, is there a statutory violation of federal law here? Probably not. Some people have made the argument that this was something of value from a foreign government. Federal law prohibits foreign campaign contributions or anything of value from a foreign government, and people think there could be a prosecutable case there. But most legal experts would tell you that's a bit of a stretch. What was the thing of value? We don't even know what it was, much less placing some, monetary figure on what this was worth, because at the end of the day, it's not clear any information changed hands. But when you see, long before there was talk about Russian meddling in the election, long before the U.S. intelligence community had said there was an influence campaign coming from the highest levels of the Russian government, specifically Vladimir Putin, to tilt the U.S. election in favor of Donald Trump and against Hillary Clinton, here you have an email chain saying exactly the same thing. Right. Coming from somebody who's working for a oligarch very close to Vladimir Putin himself. In fact, by the way, going back to that Miss Universe contest pageant, 10 days before, Putin had personally given one of the Kremlin's highest honors, an order for the
Right.
honor of the Russian Federation, to Mr. Agalarov, the father of Emin. This does at a minimum seem to bolster the conclusions of the U.S. intelligence community, and it does make one wonder, as it would make any investigator wonder, if this email was a one-off,
Mm-hmm.
or whether, since the meeting apparently didn't come of it, if there were other efforts through other means to do the same thing. If the Russian government really did have what Rob Goldstone said in that email, if they really had that information, did they just drop it after nothing came of this meeting, and did the Trump campaign drop it after nothing came of this meeting, or were there follow-up efforts to figure out exactly what it was Goldstone was talking about, and were there other ways to get this information?
Obviously, there's going to be Rob Mueller is going to be investigating this, and there'll be some forensic accounting, and who knows what's going to happen when there's actually an investigation in Capitol Hill. But just Donald Trump Jr.'s actions alone, separate from impeachment, separate from even treason, does it seem like, because this is what you're seeing right now, everybody's talking about all these things and they're kind of flowing, the arguments are flowing into each other, but they're all separate things. Does it seem that lawyers seem to be making case that he can be prosecuted for his actions, for being aware of how his meeting represented the campaign, and his personal intent and his actions, are those could you see them being prosecuted?
Like I said, I don't see a statutory violation of the law here based on this email chain. It looks really bad.
Right.
I think you can argue it is really bad because he was explicitly informed that a foreign government was the source of this information and was trying to help his father's campaign. And look, if a similar overture was made to the Clinton campaign, somebody somehow connected with the Russian government or some other governments said, by the way, we have some really damaging information about Donald Trump and his relations in Russia. Would the Clinton campaign have said, how dare you approach us with this information? We're going to call the FBI? I suspect not. But what I think would have happened is, what would not have happened is John Podesta and Robbie Mook would not have sat down with whoever the emissary is. Some cutout, some intermediary, somebody not directly working for the campaign would have been told, hey, why don't you meet with this person and see what it is they're talking about and what they got. You would have kept your distance for precisely the reason we're seeing the way this has blown up this week. You don't have your campaign manager and a senior campaign official sit down with an emissary from the Kremlin offering, political oppo research. That's just, something that good campaign practices,
experienced campaigns.
Tell you, experienced campaign. Now, the other side of the coin is the Trump campaign was not an experienced campaign. These people hadn't run political campaigns before, although
Roger Stone and Paul Manafort had, and they did have people around them that were involved that could have advised them. But
So look, I think this looks really bad. It is really bad. It's certainly going to fuel the interest of the investigators in pursuing a lot of different angles here, including those financial relationships I was talking about before between Donald Trump, the Trump Organization, and the Agalarovs. All that needs to be looked at as part of this investigation. But, in and of itself, I don't think it's going to lead to a criminal charges. But what it also does is undermine the credibility of everything the White House and the president and his surrogates have been saying for months now.
You saw Fox News. They reported on this 20 minutes later after MSNBC and CNN had broken the news because their messaging had been, for the most part, in support of Donald Trump. It's really fascinating. And I guess that just leads to the final question of if this does become an impeachable, if something leads to impeachment, how much of it is based on evidence, smoking gun evidence, and how much of it is based on the court of public opinion and having enough votes in Congress and the Senate to move forward, even if there isn't enough. It's death by 10,000 cuts.
Right. Impeachment is a political process. I mean, it always has been. It always will be. High crimes and misdemeanors are not specifically defined in the Constitution. So, it is, what is where is the country politically? Where is the Congress politically? Right now, we still have Republican control of the House and Senate. Now, this did shatter the faith of some Republicans in Congress. But has it gotten them to the point where they're going to be backing impeachment? I don't see that as of now. But it's a moment. It's a moment that will be remembered, and we'll see. A lot is going to have to depend on, are there other emails that come out? Are there other instances in which White House statements or statements by the president are undermined and completely destroyed by the emergence of hard evidence? So it's significant, but it's still way premature to be talking about.
Oh my God, we have a long road ahead of us.
We have a long road.
Mike Isikoff, thank you, Chief Investigative Correspondent for Yahoo News. Always a pleasure. Thanks for giving us our Russia update in a nutshell.
Anytime.
All right, take care.
Take care.